Stay with CNN for the latest from Ukraine. The news continues this hour. I want to turn things over to Don and Don Lemon tonight.
Anderson,
Don?
it's good to see you there on the ground. You've been on a number of war zones. It strikes me, now you can correct me if I'm wrong, to see this many civilians actively taking part in fighting for their country. Is that unusual? Is that something that you can speak to or you've observed?
I mean, I think certainly to see so many civilians taking part against such an overwhelming force as the Russian army, I think is really an extraordinary thing to see. I mean, I've certainly been in places where, you know, people have taken up arms, formed roadblocks and things like that. But I think it's the mobilization of the entire country, which I think was even unexpected to some Ukrainians who didn't maybe expect this to happen like it has. But I mean, the sense of solidarity and the sense of the outrage and sort of just the defiance it's a beautiful thing to witness, if that's the right word. But it's really extraordinary.
Yeah, it is. Can I just debrief you on I saw your interview with the mother, the newborn, actually breastfeeding. You have a newborn as well. It was an unbelievable interview, very emotional interview. Talk to me about that.
Yeah, she's extraordinary. She is in not even a bomb shelter. She is in a basement in KYIV, as are hundreds, if not thousands, of people, families, children, women, just trying to make it through the night. She's been there now for several days. She's got 3 children. She was breastfeeding her 3-month-old child. And her husband is a journalist, but has signed up to fight and is out with civil defense forces doing what he can. You know, there are many people who have tried to leave, you know, who have left, a lot of women, a lot of children who've been able to try to get to the border. And that's an arduous journey, and it's difficult, and they've been able to seek safety. And there's many more still who are here who don't have a way to get out, or who've just chosen to stay. And this courage that they're showing in the face of this, to be taking care of 3 children in a basement with, you know, dwindling food supplies, dwindling medical supplies. It is freezing out here. You know, it is the conditions are just going to be getting worse. I talked to the mayor of Kyiv earlier today, Vitaly Klitschko, who said, you know, there's a looming humanitarian crisis that could occur here of a lack of medicine as supply lines run short. And, you know, if what the worst fears are realized of what the Russian tactics may be moving forward, cutting off supply lines, cutting off electricity, cutting off power, cell phone service, that is all part of the Russian playbook in a situation like this.
Yeah, and listen, the timeline, according to lawmakers here, of cities falling and for all of those supplies dwindling is much quicker than they even thought. And that woman that you interviewed, that mother, is just one of many who are facing similar situations. Anderson, thank you so much. Be safe. We will see you tomorrow. Thanks a lot. And this is Don Lemon tonight, and here's our breaking news. U.S. officials fear the worst is yet to come from Kyiv. A Western official telling CNN Vladimir Putin's military is, and I quote here, well behind the schedule it's set for the invasion, as Ukrainians fight back harder than he may have expected. And there are fears an angry and frustrated Putin will escalate. New satellite images from Maxar Technology show a Russian military convoy getting closer and closer to Kyiv, is much larger than previously thought. More than 40 miles long, as a matter of fact. The company notes it saw plumes of smoke rising from a number of homes and buildings near the roads where the convoy is traveling. It is unclear what caused those plumes of smoke. The White House closely monitoring the convoy. That, as members of Congress coming out of a classified briefing tonight, they said were given an alarming timeline for when Ukrainian cities could fall. Senators warning the Russian invasion appears likely to intensify. And in the country's second largest city, Kharkiv's mayor says 9 civilians have been killed in Russian rocket attacks. President Vladimir Zelensky says civilians are being targeted and killed and accuses Russia of a war crime.
It was clearly a war crime. Kharkiv is a peaceful city. There are peaceful residential areas, no military facilities. Dozens of eyewitness accounts prove that this is not a single false volley, but deliberate destruction of people. The Russians knew where they were shooting.
And there's this military strikes on a supermarket and multiple apartment complexes. This video posted online shows what appears to be rockets landing in quick succession outside an apartment block as people flee. The toll of Vladimir Putin's war after only 5 days, at least 406 civilians killed or injured. The UN says more than 500,000 refugees have fled Ukraine to neighboring countries. I'm going to get right now to our worldwide coverage. Let's get right to CNN's Matthew Chance in Kyiv. Jill Doherty is in Moscow. Sarah Seidner on the border with Poland. Phil Mattingly at the White House and Oren Lieberman at the Pentagon. This massive 40-mile-long Russian convoy. We have new satellite imagery showing images of it. It's reached the outskirts of Kyiv, which we know Putin wants. The Ukrainians have been incredibly strong so far, but what's on the way now looks like an enormous second wave, Matthew.
Yeah, it does. And I think it marks the end, perhaps, of that initial strategy of Vladimir Putin to fly in special forces in small sort of crack groups, hope that the Ukrainian military fold and, achieve a quick takeover of the Ukrainian capital. If that was the initial tactic, that has completely failed. The airports haven't necessarily been held that were originally taken by the special forces that were flown in. The defense of Kiev has been really much more impressive by the Ukrainian security forces and the various civilian defense outfits than anyone had really anticipated. And if Vladimir Putin felt that or thought that there was going to be mass defections to the Russian side, they were going to be welcomed with open arms, the military were going to fold here in Ukraine, I mean, he was very, very much mistaken. And we've seen sort of evidence, on the streets of that failure. I mean, earlier I came across, and we've seen this multiple times, but earlier today I came across a Russian armored convoy that had attempted to move down a bridge towards the capital and had been absolutely hammered, devastated by concerted Ukrainian defense. I mean, no one in that convoy could have survived. There were dead bodies strewn all over the place. And I think that's been a real wake-up call for the Kremlin. Now, there's a possibility they could back down, of course. That's always a possibility, a very remote one, and perhaps cut their losses and run. It's not in character with Vladimir Putin, though. And all the signs, particularly with that massive, long convoy of armoured vehicles heading towards Kiev now, all the signs are that Vladimir Putin is much more likely to double down than to back down. Don.
To Oren Lieberman now at the Pentagon. Oren, U.S. officials fear the worst is yet to come for Kyiv. So talk to me about the supply lines for security assistance. Anderson just mentioned that. Is the U.S. still able to get military systems and other help to Ukraine?
The Pentagon is confident that it is still able to get the supplies into the hands of the people who need it. Now, of course, they're very cagey about exactly what goes in, although they have said that lethal and non-lethal assistance continue to go in, including within the last day. And they're also very cagey about how it gets in, how it comes. We know, or we're at least confident to say, the U.S. isn't going through the air because the airspace is contested, and the U.S. wants to avoid any sort of confrontation between U.S. forces and Russian forces. That still leaves a few options, basically through the western borders of Ukraine, whether it's Poland, Romania, Slovakia. When we asked, are you confident that it's getting to those who need it? Are you confident the lines are still open? Pentagon Press Secretary John Kirby today essentially said, yes, we're confident it's going in. And on top of that, he said they're confident they're using not only the U.S. aid, but also the aid from other countries, that Ukrainians are using it effectively. Now, as Matthew just pointed out, it is a question of numbers right now. Do they have enough aid? How much time do you have left to get more aid in? And how creatively can you continue to use the lethal assistance you're getting against a much larger force? That's a question, Don, we may very well be about to horribly find out the answer to.
All right, Oren, stand by. Phil Mattingly at the White House. Now, almost overnight, the U.S. and its allies will turn Russia into a financial pariah state with crippling sanctions. You have reporting tonight about the behind-the-scenes, months-long diplomacy at play here. What do you know?
You know, John, I think the scale and the velocity of the sanctions package by more than 30 countries from 4 continents surprised even some officials here at the White House. But the origins of that package, actually getting to that outcome, actually started in mid-November. It was at that point, I'm told by several officials, that 3 cabinet agencies, officials from 3 cabinet agencies across the National Security Council really put the full weight of the Biden administration behind crafting that package, trying to let their European counterparts in particular, but also those in the UK, Australia, Canada, other countries as well, know what was coming and what they thought the response should be. And the scale of that response changed over time. It evolved over time. It evolved in particular over the course of the last several days, when one European official told me that they saw what was happening. They saw the images, but they also heard directly from Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, and it completely changed the trajectory of that package and what that means, both the work that the U.S. officials put behind the scenes over the course of the last several months, and then this kind of almost peaking moment of the course of the last several days, is the most unprecedented sanctions package for a country of Russia's size. $1.7 trillion. It's integrated in a global economy like we've never seen before in terms of targeting them in this basis. And you can look at what's happened in Russian markets to see the immediate effect. You had the ruble down more than 30% at one point today. The ruble against the dollar, 1 cent was the value, less than 1 cent at some points. The stock market closed. You see lines across banks and ATMs. There's a recognition that these sanctions are real. These sanctions have bite. And Don, when you talk to officials here at the White House, they say the real bite of the sanctions will happen over time. How this sanctions package actually came together, in large part because the Biden administration, when most nobody was paying attention, European officials were still skeptical about that intelligence, was working behind the scenes to put it together. What they have put together, not just in terms of scale of the actual sanctions, but scale of the coalition, is something that we simply haven't seen before, and it underscores the seriousness of this moment.
Joe Doherty, in Moscow now, 2 Russian oligarchs are calling on Putin to end his war. Russian authorities have detained nearly 6,000 people for participating in unsanctioned anti-war protests since the war started. The big question is, through all of this, is what are people of Russia really thinking about this unjust war?
You know, it is so hard to say because it varies. I still think that probably the majority support this operation, and primarily because they've been watching on TV and being given this idea by the government, of course, that it is an attack on Russia, that Ukraine is being used by NATO to attack Russia. And what's more, they are neo-fascists and neo-Nazis. So there's, among the people who are watching TV, they really do think that they had to have this war. This is important to protect Russia. But, there, as you mentioned, there are protests. They are not huge, but they are significant, and especially they're significant at a time where it is very dangerous to really protest. People have been arrested and detained. Usually they're held, and there has been some violence. We saw it, in previous video, but that is growing. And you also had a little bit pushback in the parliament, 2 or 3 people who are criticizing it. But essentially, I think, there are a lot of people who are still convinced by President Putin and the massive propaganda campaign right now. And Don, I just wanted to add one thing about the military side. President Putin today spoke with President Macron of France. And after that meeting, the French came out essentially saying that they are more worried, about escalation. In fact, a spokesperson for the Élysée Palace said there are good reasons to fear that civilians will be targeted more massively and without precautions by the Russians. So that is coming after the conversation between President Macron and directly with Putin. So it's a very worrying sign.
All right, Jill, Oren, Phil, and Matthew, please stand by, everyone. Thank you so much. The world has turned upside down in Ukraine in just a matter of days. Now a couple who got married just hours after Russia invaded their country, they are fighting to defend Ukraine. You're going to meet them next.